Okay, it is 9:30. Let's get started. We have one more week to get through before spring break, so I'm sure we all want to get out of here quickly. First of all, any questions? No questions. Okay, well, what I want to do today is start off. Okay. I want to start off by going over RSA again and doing it the right way. We'll then talk about certificates and how certificates work for authenticating things, and then we will be done with encryption and we will move on to network security issues. And we'll sort of look at different levels of the networking stack. So we'll start off with RSA. The fundamental idea with RSA is sort of based around this equation. Z equals y to the x mod n. This is modular exponentiation, which means that you divide by n, and you take y to the x, divide by n, and then you take the remainder. And the idea is that this is something where it's relatively easy to compute exponentiation. You just multiply a lot of times. But reversing it, sort of doing a logarithm, and figuring out what x is, for example, is difficult. So generally, discrete logarithm is considered a mathematically difficult problem that takes a long time to solve. So this is what we like for encryption. Things that are hard are good to use as a primitive because they make it hard for an attacker to do something. So if we make the number sufficiently big, we can make an attacker take sort of an arbitrarily long time to figure out what x is if they know zy. If they know z, y, and n. So what we also like are trapdoors, which I mentioned before, which is there some secret piece of information which, if you have, makes this a lot easier. So in this case, our trapdoor is that if you have z, you can solve for y if the factorization of n is known. So this is something that is sort of, non-trivial and not obvious. But it means that if somebody has this secret information, the factorization of n, they can use that to sort of compute what y is if they know z and x. So the idea is this will sort of form the secret key basis of this, that the factorization will sort of be the secret we're protecting. And the way we'll decrypt things is to sort of, given the value z, knowing what x is, we will have a way to compute y. Okay, so that is the math basis for this. So let's see how this works in practice. So we have Alice who wants to receive communication from anyone. Alice is going to select two large prime numbers, p and q. So as I said before, these should be nice large numbers. She is going to publish the number n, which is the product of p and q. This is the n we saw in the previous slide, which is the modulus. And this is, in effect, going to be her public key, this value n. When anyone wants to send a message to her, they will take their message y. They will use this value x, which I'll talk about in a minute, and they will compute z equals y to the x mod n. So they're going to take the message, raise it to this power x modulo n, and send the result. So we will talk about where x comes in a minute. So z sends, Alice is going to send z, so anyone is going to send z and x to Alice. But the idea is, remember that even knowing what z and x is, doing the logarithm, figuring out what the log of y is base x is difficult. Figuring out the discrete logarithm to calculate what y is very difficult. But Alice is going to have a backdoor to do this. So Alice, who knows p and q, will sort of know the factorization of this modulus, and so Alice will be able to reverse this. So this is kind of the crux for RSA, what we're going to do. So what we will now go into is, what is x, and how does Alice actually use the knowledge of p and q to decrypt this message? Any questions at this point? No. Okay. So there is a nice property of modular exponentiation, which says if n is a product of two primes, pq, and y to the x mod n equals y, then y to the x mod n is actually equal to y, the original message here. if x mod p minus 1 times q minus 1 equals 1 and y is between 0 and n. So this is, again, a curious mathematical property that is going to tell us what we need to do to pick x. If we pick x correctly, then we can take advantage of this fact that Alice knows p and q to actually do the decryption. So Alice is going to select integers e and d so that e and d mod p minus 1 q minus 1 equals 1. So this means that x is really equal to the product of e and d. Okay, so we don't actually deal with x, we deal with e and d instead. So far so good? Okay, so what we're now going to say is that we're actually, the encryption that we're dealing with, when we encrypt, we're going to say, we're going to take the message and raise it to the power e modulo n. When we decrypt, we're going to take the message and raise the message to the power decrypting y is going to raise d to the y to the power d modulo n. So note here that encrypting and decrypting in this case are sort of symmetric. They're both taking this y as input. But what we have now is this property. Now what happens if we apply both operations, d and e? Right? So if we have apply the d operation to the e operation, we have y to the e mod n raised to the power d, which is y to the power ed. And we said that x is the product ed, and we said that y to the x mod n equals y. So what we're seeing here is that this is how Alice can sort of recover the message value y. Right? So anybody who knows n and e can do that encryption stage because they can do that first step. If only Alice knows d, only Alice can do this decryption stage of raising to the power d. And so whenever Alice gets a message, she can raise that message to the power d modulo n, and because of this mathematical identity property, she can recover the original message. So this sort of gives us this now gives us the basis for encrypting and decrypting messages. So hopefully this makes a lot more sense than what I was rambling on about last week. Any questions? Okay, so a question now is, what are D and E? Well, it turns out that in practice you don't actually need, one of the nice things about modular arithmetic is that you have, even for a single value of E, you can pick lots of different values of D because you're sort of always doing this wraparound operation of modular arithmetic. So this means that we can actually pick the same value of E for everybody. So every public key will have the same value of E, which is 65537, 2 to the 16 plus 1. So this means now that our public key doesn't even actually include this value E, it's just that modulus n. So then Alice has to compute D, and D is really going to be, something that looks weird when you think about regular arithmetic. 1 divided by some big integer. You would think this would be a fraction, but because of modular arithmetic, it all works out. So Alice can compute this operation to find D. And this will give her a secret. Now note that she has to know P and Q here to do this, which are again secrets because only she knows how to factor n. So this is how, once Alice finds P and Q, she can compute n very easily. She can then compute P and Q and compute D, given that this value E is fixed at 65537. So the result is that when you look at public keys, what you see is the public key, as I said before, is really just this modulus here. So the public key for Alice is NA. When you want to encrypt something to send it to Alice, you're going to compute y to the E, where E is this constant value modulo n. To send something to Bob, Bob's public key is NB. We're going to encrypt that by taking y to the constant value E modulo NB. And so this becomes a fairly straightforward mechanism. And when a message comes in, Alice, Bob, and Carol can, using their secret value D, can exponentiate the message that comes in and recover the original message. So pretty cool stuff. Okay. So the next thing is to look at how do we do digital signatures. And I talked about this before. I want to go about it a little bit more detail here. So there's an additional property here, which is we can apply these operations in either order, right? Because when we're doing exponentiation, a property of, encrypting and decrypting or decrypting and encrypting results in the same message coming out either way, because the exponentiation operation is commutative. So, because only Alice knows D, she can take some message, she can compute that message raised to the power D modulo n, which is going to be her encrypting this message with her secret key. And the nice thing is that anybody with a public key now can decrypt this, and they know that only Alice could have encrypted it. So this means we have a way, this is sort of the basis for digital signatures, because this is the way that Alice can sign something. Only she can actually compute this. So if you see any message that looks like this, we can tell it came from Alice. So this is sort of what happens in TLS in practice. So we talked about TLS and how when you connect to a website, it is going, the website has a public key and a secret key. And the question is, how does the client get the public key for a website? How does it know that it's the right public key? One way is for Facebook to send you a letter that says, type in this 200-digit number into your computer when you sign up, and you would trust the US Postal Service to deliver you proper messages. And you could use that to sort of know what Facebook's public key is, so you could start verifying you're talking to Facebook. What is better is that there's some way to do this digitally. And we do that with what's called a certificate authority. And a certificate authority is an entity that we trust to say which keys go with which websites. So in this case, there's a certificate authority that will say Alice's public modulus is this big number. And the key thing that is in a certificate is it's going to say the name or who this public key is for, because we want to know whose public key it is. We don't just want to see the key value itself. We want to know whose key this is, so we know it's the key we're looking for. And then we'll have the public key. And then it has to say who is signing this, which certificate authority signed this, because there might be more than one. So we need to identify one of the many, many different certificate authorities, so we know that which public key we should use to verify the signature. So what happens when Facebook wants to do something? Facebook will ask for a certificate that says this is a certificate that covers any domain name ending or any host name ending with facebook.com. Here's the public key. They will go to a certificate authority like Digicert. They will send this information as a message X. Digicert will then sign this message using their secret key, producing a certificate that they will send back. And the certificate itself looks something like this. So inside the certificate, there's a bunch of metadata about the entity, where it's located, what is the website associated with it, star.facebook.com. Then it will sort of say what encryption mechanism it's using. Here it's using elliptic curve public key, not RSA. And it will have the parameters, if there's various options for that, and then the public key itself, how big the key is. And it will say, what is this key used for? Because you might say this key can only be used for digital signatures and not for encrypting data, which would mean if you saw something encrypted, something might be sketchy. And then at the bottom is the actual signature, which is the sort of encrypted checksum over everything else. So one thing to note is that the private key for the certificate authority is pretty valuable. Right? Because a certificate authority can issue a certificate for any website in the world. There's nothing that says that only Digicert can issue a certificate for Facebook. VeriSign can issue a certificate. I could issue a certificate for Facebook. And this means that if you can break into a certificate authority, you can basically create a certificate for any website in the world that you want, that every browser will trust. And then if you think about what happens if you can create a certificate for a website, how could you use that as an attacker? Yes?
You generate a public key yourself and sign it, and then you make the
Right, so the idea is you generate your own certificate where you know the secret key. Well, you have to, either you can be a man-in-the-middle attack. So, for example, if you set up a VPN or something, a virtual private network, where the traffic is flowing through you, when the TLS messages come to you, instead of sending them on to the actual destination server, you can send back you can sort of finish that TLS connection and send back your own certificate. The client will trust your certificate and encrypt and generate a secret symmetric key using that certificate that you then can learn because you know the secret key. And so you can decrypt all that encrypted traffic. So it means that you can basically get in the middle of any connection to any web server that's secure. And if you can convince a client that your web server is in fact the one they're looking for, then you can actually convince them to connect directly to you and feed them whatever bogus data you want. So can you think of a legitimate reason why you might want to do this? Like, why would you? So I talked about how you could be a certificate authority for nefarious purposes. Are there valid reasons that you might want to act as a man in the middle and do the same kind of attack, but for a legitimate reason? And I ask this because there are companies like Amazon that actually do this to their customers, to some of their customers, and they have a legitimate business reason. Do you have a thought? Oh, I saw your hand up. Yes.
So when you try to do content delivery networks,
So
when you encrypt all traffic between client and server, the content delivery network cannot intercept and cache in their own servers. So when they do a man-in-the-middle attack, they decrypt the traffic and cache static contents inside the content delivery.
So that is sort of the idea. Amazon actually does it not for their content delivery network, but the idea is if there's something you can optimize or make perform faster or some function you can add to add value for the customer, you normally can't sit in the middle of the traffic and modify it for encrypted data. You can only do it for unencrypted data. So if you can convince the client to treat you as a certificate authority, you can do the same thing for encrypted data. So for example, Amazon Fire tablets trust Amazon as a certificate authority. When they connect to any website, their traffic always goes to Amazon first, where it's decrypted, and then Amazon's machines in the Amazon data centers actually connect to Facebook or Google or wherever you're going. And the reason they do this is that they can then compress the data they send back to you so that it uses less network traffic and performs better. So that as the browser, you have sort of better performance because a bunch of the slow parts are either being removed or those things that are slow are being done by beefy servers in Amazon instead of by your little wimpy tablet. So you can do this to sort of make, add performance enhancements on top of encrypted traffic by decrypting in the middle, doing your optimization, and then re-encrypting it when it goes to the server. But it means when you're using an Amazon Fire tablet, Amazon gets to see everything that you're doing and all the traffic that you're doing, which you may or may not want. So you might wonder, what does it take to actually get a certificate? Like, could you get a certificate authority? How much security is to this? So it doesn't take a whole lot. You don't have to pay anything to get certificates at this point. You have to prove to some certificate authority that you own the website for 5 minutes while you're actually doing this. So if you once you register a domain name, you can use that registration to prove that you own this domain. You can then go get a certificate for that domain. But you only have to own it for a little while. You don't have to hold on to it because the certificate is sort of a one-time thing that says, when I gave this to you, you had the website. And they can't enforce that you control it for the future. It just says you had it at the time this was issued. And then you have to sort of prove when you're actually connecting and getting the certificate that you know the secret key. So very often when you're getting a certificate, you as the website owner will generate your own public key, private secret key pair. You send the public key to the certificate authority to be signed, and you have to prove that you know the corresponding secret key. Because it wouldn't make sense to sign a public key saying this is the right public key if it was in fact a public key that the website owner didn't know anything about. So as I said before, what things that can go wrong? So a CA secret key could be compromised. So if you have the secret key that a certificate authority has, you can create your own certificates then signed by that certificate authority that you can do anything you want with. So I remember when I worked at Microsoft, they use certificates to digitally sign their software. So when you get Windows, Windows comes with a digital certificate saying this is a signature over the entire checksum of Windows saying that this is a valid copy of Windows. And at the time, Microsoft actually had a dedicated room in a different city with an armed guard at all times and a locked door, and then they had their secret key sort of in a device where it was sort of floating on mercury. And so if you physically tampered with it, the mercury would short out the chip holding the secret key, and the secret key bits would vanish and not be recoverable. Because they felt like if you had that secret key, you could basically write your own software, pretend to be Microsoft, and a billion people would install it, believing they were being secure. Other things that could go wrong with this model is, you're getting your public key signed, but what if your secret key is compromised? Somebody breaks into your system and gets it, then that certificate that says this is the right public key isn't very meaningful, because what it's really saying is the corresponding secret key is only known to the server. That's the actual thing that is being certified, is that the secret key is known to the right person, not that the public key is necessarily that great. The other thing you could do is typo squatting. So, remember there's a name in a certificate. So if you, and all the browser does is check that the name of the certificate matches the name that you type into the browser. If you make a typo in the browser, then I can get a certificate for that typo, and you will connect to me, and I'm the owner of that typo domain, Gmail, for example, and you'll connect, and it'll be a secure connection. You're just connecting to the wrong person. So this definitely requires that you sort of connect to the correct location. Other things you can do is if you can put a malicious certificate authority that's trusted in the client, this is the Amazon case that I talked about, then you can make the client trust anybody you want. So how does this factor into the TLS protocol? We're finally have gone through every single piece of this protocol, so you should understand it completely. So here's the first message. Remember the client hello. We're sending a version, this random nonce, the cipher suites we support. The server sends back its hello message. It sends back its version number, a session ID, the cipher suite they're going to use. It also here sends back the certificate. So this is the public key of the server, the domain name, the signature, and it might be a certificate chain. So I mentioned that we have certificates, but you can play the same trick recursively. So if I can have a certificate from VeriSign that says Google in it. And then I might have a certificate from Google So in this case, there's a chain of certificates where this is my certificate signed by Google. So I can look at this and say, okay, why should I trust that this is Google's public key? So here's a certificate from VeriSign that says this is Google's public key. So this is called a chain of certificates, and you can sort of run it as long as you want. And the idea is that each step in the chain is sort of proved by a previous or the next step in the chain, depending how you think about it, until at some point the chain ends in a root that you trust already. So for TLS, the reason you might want to do this is you might have a certificate for, start.facebook.com, and then Facebook might issue a certificate for, messenger.facebook.com. That is what it actually uses. And so this allows Facebook to generate their own certificates so they can have different certificates for all their web servers. So why might you want to have different certificates for your different web servers? Well, let's sort of go on in the protocol and we'll see why it might matter. So once we get the certificate, remember the client is going to use the public key of the server to encrypt this pre-master secret and send it back. And both sides will compute this master secret and these keys. And at this point, they have the keys for encryption. And then the client will issue this change cipher spec saying everything after this is going to be encrypted. And the server will say the same thing, saying that we are finished, we have finished the unencrypted piece. Here is the encrypted piece. So why might we want to have sort of multiple different certificates that are being used in this protocol? So to sort of recap, I'm suggesting there's some certificate for all of Facebook, and they might want to have a certificate for their Facebook Messenger service, or Instagram as a different certificate. There are other cases where you might want to have a company issue multiple different certificates. Well, so remember, one of the things that can go wrong with using certificates, and one of the things that can go wrong is that if the server's key is compromised or stolen somehow. So if we use the Facebook.com certificate for every web server at Facebook, remember that message encrypting the pre-master secret with PKS, anybody who decrypts this has to have the secret key for the corresponding certificate. This would mean that there might be 5,000 web servers that would have to have the key for Facebook.com. If any of those were compromised and the key was stolen, then the entire Facebook operation would sort of no longer be secure. So as a result, what you might want to do is say, we're going to give every single web server its own certificate that Facebook generates, and that will be signed using Facebook certificate. So this means that each individual web server only knows its own secret key for its own certificate. So when we do the exchange, we are encrypting that public key there is really the server's public key. The client will verify it by verifying that the certificate for the server was signed by the Facebook public key and the Facebook public key was signed by VeriSign. So this means that when that server's compromised, we just have one server that's down, but everything else is still secure and valid. So we have sort of limited how much goes wrong by making sure that we try not to share public keys and secret key pairs across multiple machines. Clear? Maybe? So clearly, as with everything, this has gone wrong. So Diginotar was a Dutch certificate authority. In 2011, people found that attackers were generating fake certificates signed by Diginotar's public key, secret key, which was installed with popular browsers. So for example, somebody created a fake certificate for Twitter, and then they were able to convince Twitter users to go to a fake website for Twitter instead of the real Twitter website. And they could then eavesdrop because they could decrypt all the messages and do a man-in-the-middle attack. The Iranian government used this same approach to eavesdrop on its citizens, on dissidents, because they could convince those dissidents to connect to the wrong mail servers, for example, email servers, and then they could see all the encrypted email they were sending back and forth because they had access to this, to the key. So what happened? Well, it turns out that Diginotar for security company was really just not doing the standard best practice for security. They had out-of-date antivirus software. They weren't patching things. They had bad passwords. They didn't have auditing to see what was happening. They had a poorly designed local network. It was not really sort of one thing. They just had overall a very insecure setup for something that the entire world is trusting them to be secure, and they were just clearly failing at this job. So that's not the only thing that can go wrong. So Dell, a fairly reputable computer company, shipped a computer with a certificate in it. And one thing that was interesting is they shipped what's called a self-signed certificate. A self-signed certificate is when the certificate is signed with the secret key that corresponds to that public key inside the certificate. So often, if you're the root certificate authority, this makes sense because there's nobody above you. So there's nobody who can sign VeriSign certificate, so VeriSign signs their own certificate. But what Dell did is they gave this root certificate authority, and it was sort of something that just Dell created, but they pre-installed it on Dell computers. And then they actually included the secret key with the certificate. So that means every single person who bought a Dell computer had the secret key for this certificate. And as a owner of a Dell computer, you could use this secret key to generate certificates that for Dell that other Dell computer owners would trust, and so you could sort of attack other people with Dell computers. They did this because they wanted a way to sort of secure their automatic maintenance and update, and checking if you have the right drivers. But including the secret key in every computer is clearly a colossal mistake. Furthermore, they wanted this to be reliable, so if you tried to remove the certificate, it would reinstall it every time you reboot. So as a user, you couldn't actually even sort of stop this thing from happening. So the key takeaway is that RSA is great, certificates are great, but you need to sort of wrap everything with a layer of sort of security best practices to make sure that you don't leak your secret keys, that people can't issue their own certificates inappropriately.